At the end of a certain Michaelmas term, and it wasn't actually so very many years ago, I had the honour of being invited to a feast in the hospitable hall of St John's College, Cambridge. I found myself seated next to the university professor of ontography, Professor Parkins. He's a young, neat, very precise little man. I expect you'll be getting away quite soon now that full term is over, Professor, I said. What? Oh, yes, indeed, yes. My friends have made me take up golf this term, and I mean to go to the East Coast, in point of fact to Burnstow, for a week to 10 days to improve my game. I hope to get away tomorrow. Did you say you were going to Burnstow, Parkins? Said his neighbour on the other side. If you are, I wish you'd have a look at the Templars Preceptory. Let me know that you think it might be worth having a dig there in the summer. Well, it was, as you might suppose, a gentleman of antiquarian interests who said this, but as he merely appears in this prologue, there's no need, I think, to give his entitlements. Certainly, said Parkins. I mean, if you tell me where the site is, I shall be glad to give you an idea of the lie of the land. I could even write you about it if you tell me where you're likely to be. Oh, no, no need to do that, Parkins. No, that's quite all right. No, it's just I was thinking of heading that way with the family in the long, and well, as so few of the English preceptories have been properly planned, I thought I might do something useful in the off days. Yeah, I think Professor Parkins rather sniffed at the idea that the planning out of a preceptory could be described as useful, but, well, his neighbour continued. Yes, the site, and I doubt if there's anything showing above the ground, must be quite close to the beach by now. Yeah, as you know, the sea has encroached tremendously all along that part of the coast, but judging from the old maps, I think it must be about 3/4 of a mile from the Globe Inn at the north end of the town. Where are you staying, Parkins? Well, at the Globe Inn, as a matter of fact. Really? Yeah. I couldn't get in anywhere else. No, all the boarding houses are shut up in winter, it seems. And, well, as it is, the only room of any size that they can offer me is a twin-bedded one. Not ideal, I know, but, well, you see, I need some space. Oh, yes, no, I mean to do some writing when I'm there, and, well, even though I hardly like the idea of having an empty bed, not to mention two, in what I shall have to, for the time being, call my study, I suppose I'll manage to rough it for a week or two. You call having an empty bed in your room roughing it, Parkins? Said a bluff person opposite. Look here, I'll come down and occupy it for a night or two if you like. Be good company for you. Yes, well, Professor Parkins quivered slightly, but he managed to laugh in a courteous fashion. Yes, obviously, Rogers, there's nothing I'd like better, but no, it might be rather dull for you, I'm afraid. You don't play golf, do you? God, no, said rude Mr. Rogers. Oh, no, well, you see, that is what I mean. When I'm not writing, I shall most likely be out on the links, and that, as I say, would be rather dull for you, I'm afraid. Oh, I don't know. Bound to be someone else I know in the place. But no, if you don't want me there, Parkins, just say the word. I shan't be offended. Truth, as you were always telling us, is never offensive. No, I wouldn't dream of interrupting your writing, not to mention your golf. But, well, I thought you might enjoy the company. And after all, I thought I should do so nicely to keep the ghosts off. Oh, God, I'm sorry. Naughty me. I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry, Parkins, I forgot. You don't like loose talk on such subjects. Now, Professor Parkins actually turned pink. No, Rogers. No, since you raised the subject, I freely own that I do not like careless talk on what you describe as ghosts. Now, I found that a man in my position can hardly be too careful about appearing to condone the current beliefs on such subjects. I hold that any appearance, any semblance of a concession to the view that such things might exist is tantamount to a renunciation of all that I hold most sacred, as you perfectly well know, Rogers, or as you ought to know, for I believe I've never hidden my thoughts on this subject. No, you certainly have not, old man. You certainly have not. What was that? Oh, no, nothing, old chap. No. I dare say you're right. But, well, maybe we can go into greater detail on some other occasion. In Burnstow, perhaps. Oh, golly. Well, all right. Anyway, my purpose in recounting this dialogue was to convey the impression that it made upon me at the time. That Professor Parkins was something of an old woman, rather hen-like, perhaps, in his ways. I mean, totally devoid, alas, of the sense of humour, but at the same time a man dauntless and sincere in his convictions, and as such, I think, really worthy of the very greatest respect. Whether or not I have succeeded in conveying that impression, that was the character that Professor Parkins did have. Well, the following morning he succeeded, as he'd hoped, in getting away from college and arriving in Burnstow. He was made welcome at the Globe Inn and safely installed in that large twin-bedded room, of which you've already heard. Now, before retiring to rest, he was able to arrange his materials for work in apple pie order upon a commodious table that occupied the outer end of the room and was surrounded on three sides by windows looking seaward. Or, that is to say, the central window looked out across the water, while those to the left and right commanded prospect along the shore to the north and the south, respectively. To the south, one saw the village of Burnstow. To the north, no houses were visible. There was just the beach and the low cliff backing it. Now, immediately in front, there was a narrow strip of rough grass dotted with old anchors, capstans and so forth, and then there was a broad path, and then it was the beach. Yeah. I mean, whatever had been the original distance between the sea and the Globe Inn, not more than, 60 yards now separated them. The rest of the population of the inn was, as you might imagine, a golfing one, and contained few elements that call for special description. Perhaps the most conspicuous figure was that of an ancien militaire, the secretary of a London club, a man possessed of a voice of incredible strength and views of a pronouncedly Protestant type, which were apt to find utterance after his attendance upon the ministrations of the vicar, himself an estimable fellow with a tendency towards a rather picturesque ritual that he gallantly suppressed as far as he could out of deference for East Anglian tradition. Now, Professor Parkins, one of whose principal characteristics was pluck, spent the greater part of the day following his arrival in what he described as improving his game in the company of this Colonel Wilson. And as the day wore on, whether the process of improvement were to be blamed or not, I'm uncertain, but the Colonel's demeanour assumed a colouring so lurid that even Parkins jibbed at the idea of walking home with him from the links. Yeah, he determined after a brief and furtive look at that bristling moustache and those incarnadine features that it might be wiser to allow the influences of tea and tobacco to work what they might with the Colonel before the dinner hour should render a meeting inevitable. Yes, I might walk home tonight along the beach, he reflected. Yes, and take a look at those ruins that Disney was talking about. Well, I don't know where they are exactly, but I suspect I can hardly help stumbling upon them. And, well, you see, this he achieved, I may say, in the most literal sense. Because as he picked his way from the links to the beach, his foot caught, partly on a gorse root and partly on a biggish stone, and over the Professor went. Now, when he got up and surveyed his surroundings, he found himself in a patch of somewhat broken ground that was covered in small indentations and mounds. Now, upon closer inspection, these proved simply to be masses of flints embedded in mortar and grown over with turf. Now, he concluded, quite rightly as it turned out, that he must be at the site of the preceptory that he'd promised to look at. Now, he vaguely remembered that the Knights Templar were in the habit of building round churches, and indeed a series of these indentations and divots close to him did seem to describe something of a circular form. Well, I mean, few of us, I think, can resist the temptation of carrying out a little amateur research in a department quite outside our own, if only for the satisfaction of showing how terribly good we'd have been had we taken it up professionally. But, well, if the professor did feel something of that mean desire, he was also genuinely anxious to oblige his colleague, and so he carefully paced out the circular area and noted its rough dimensions in his pocketbook. He then proceeded to examine an oblong, an eminence, I suppose you'd call it, which lay east of the centre of the circle and seemed to his thinking likely to be the basis of a platform or even an altar. Now, at one end of this, the northern, a patch of turf was missing, removed by some boy or other creature ferae naturae. Well, it might be well here to probe for evidences of masonry, he thought, and so he took out his pocket knife and began scraping away at the soil. And now there followed another little discovery. Yes, he did. A portion of the soil fell inward as he scraped to disclose a small cavity. Well, I mean, he lighted one match after another to help him see of what nature this hole was, but the wind was too strong for them all. However, by tapping and scratching around with his knife, he was able to make sure that it was an artificial hole in the masonry. It was rectangular, and the sides, top and bottom, if not actually plastered, were smooth and regular. Of course, it was empty. No. As he withdrew his knife, he heard a metallic clink, and when he introduced his hand, it met with a cylindrical object lying on the floor of the hole. Well, I mean, naturally enough, he picked this up, and when he brought it into the light, which was now fast fading, he saw that it too was of man's making. It was a metal tube, about 4 inches long, and, well, evidently of some considerable antiquity. Well, by the time he'd made sure there was nothing else in the hole, it was too dark and too late to think of undertaking any further search. But good heavens, I mean, what he had done had proved so unexpectedly interesting that he determined to sacrifice a little of the morrow to archaeology. The object, which was now safely in his pocket, must have some slight value at least, he felt certain. Gosh. Bleak and solemn was the view upon which he took a last look before starting homeward. A pale yellow light in the west showed the links upon which a few players drifting towards the clubhouse were still just dimly visible. The squat Martello Tower, the distant light of Aldsley village, the pale ribbon of sands, intersected at short intervals by black wooden groins, the dim and murmuring sea. Gosh, the wind was bitter from the north, but it was at his back as he started for the Globe Inn. He quickly rattled and clattered his way across the shingle before gaining the sand, where, but for these groins that had to be got over every few yards, the going was both good and quiet. What? Now, one last look behind him, to measure the distance that he'd made since leaving the ruined Templars Church, revealed the prospect of company in his walk, in the form of a rather indistinct personage who seemed to be making great efforts to catch up with him, but made little, if any, progress. What I mean to say is, although there was every appearance of running about the man's movements, the distance between him and Parkins did not seem materially to lessen. Or so Parkins thought at any rate. And, well, he decided, as he almost certainly did not know the fellow, it'd be absurd to stand and wait for him. Company, for all that, he began to think, would actually be really rather welcome on that lonely shore. Maybe if, of course, one could but choose one's companion. Yeah. No, I mean, in his unenlightened days, he had read of meetings in just such places as this that even today hardly bore thinking about. But, well, think about them he did, and of one in particular, which, I think it catches most people's fancy at some time in their childhood. I know that it did mine. Bunyan. And I saw in my dream that Christian had gone but a little way along the path when he saw a foul fiend crossing the field to meet him. God, I wonder what I should do now, thought Parkins, if I were to look up at the yellow sky and see a black figure silhouetted there and note that it had horns and wings. You know, I wonder if I should stand firm, whether I should make a run for it. Well, thankfully, the gentleman behind me is not of that kind. And good heavens, what? He hardly seems any closer than he was when I first noticed him. Well, at this rate, I shall get my dinner before he gets his. And oh gosh, yes, I see it is nearly that time already. This was a good enough reason, Parkins persuaded himself, for running the remainder of the way to the Globe Inn. Now, when he met the Colonel again at dinner, peace once more reigned in the military bosom. Nor was he put to flight by the hours of bridge that followed, for Parkins was really more than a respectable player. When, therefore, he retired towards midnight, he reflected that, in fact, the evening had really been most pleasantly spent, and that life at the Globe Inn would be quite supportable for as long as 2 or even 3 weeks under similar circumstances, especially, he thought, if I go on improving my game. Now, it was only when he was hanging up his golfing jacket and something fell out of the pocket that he remembered his little discovery of that afternoon. He picked it up and turned it over by the light of the candle with some considerable curiosity. Well, I mean, it was of bronze, he now saw, and shaped very much after the manner of the modern dog whistle. Oh, in fact, it was. It was no more or less than a whistle. He put it to his lips. Oh, pah! No, it's full of some dry caked-up earth or sand, which would not yield to knocking, but must be loosened with a knife. Now, tidier, as ever in his habits, Parkins empties this earth onto a piece of paper, which he took to the window to empty out. Now, it was a bright, clear evening, and he took a moment to look out across the water and note a belated wanderer stationed on the shore in front of the inn. Then he closed the window, somewhat surprised at the late hours that people in Burnstow seemed to keep, and took the object back to the light. Well, I mean, it now seemed as though there were markings upon it. In fact, hey, they weren't just markings, they were letters. Yeah. I mean, the very little rubbing rendered the deeply cut inscription clearly legible, but, well, good heavens, after some minutes' earnest consideration, Parkins had to admit that its meaning was as obscure to him as the writing on the wall to Belshazzar. I mean, it appeared to be Latin. Fur, fla, flay, bis. Fur. Thief, I think, isn't it? Oh, God, my Latin's rather rusty. I don't believe I even know the name for whistle. But an inscription on the other side appeared to be more straightforward. Quis est iste qui venit? Who is this? Who is coming? Well, evidently the best way to find out is to whistle for him. And he put the object to his lips. Now, the sound that he produced had a quality of infinite distance to it. And soft as it was, he felt certain that it must be somehow audible for miles around. It was a sound, too, that had the power that many scents possess of producing pictures in the mind, because he saw quite clearly for a moment a vision of a wide, dark expanse at night with a fresh wind blowing, and in the midst a lonely figure. How employed, he He could not tell. Perhaps he might have seen more had not a gust of wind shaken the casement so suddenly that it made him look up in time to see the white glint of a seabird's wing somewhere behind the dark panes. Yeah, well, the sound of the whistle was so intriguing that he determined to try it again, this time more boldly. No, you see, the sound was a little bit all louder than before, and repetition broke the illusion. No picture followed as he had half hoped that it might. But good heavens, what's this? What a tremendous gust. It's enough to tear the room to pieces. The window had been flung open this time, and while you might count to 20, Parkins struggled with the small casement. God, it almost felt as if he were pushing back a sturdy burglar at times, so strong was the pressure. It slackened all at once and the window banged to and latched itself. Right, well, now to light the candles again and see what damage has been done. Yeah, well, nothing did seem to be disturbed, and no glass even was broken in the casement. But the noise had definitely woken at least one other member of the household. The Colonel could be heard, stumping in his stocking feet on the floor above, growling. And the wind moaned on, rising at times to a pitch so desolate that, as Parkins himself said, fanciful people might have been made quite uncomfortable by it. Even the unimaginative, he was forced to concede after a quarter of an hour, might be happier without it. Now, whether it was this noise or the excitement of having played golf or his researches in the preceptory that kept him awake, he was not certain. But awake he did remain, and long enough to imagine, as I'm afraid I myself often do in similar circumstances, that he was the prey to all manner of fatal disorders. Grave doubts were entertained as to the efficiency of his heart, lungs and liver, doubts which he knew would be expelled by the coming of morning, but which until that time refused to leave him. It gave him some vicarious comfort to know that somebody else was in the same boat. A near neighbour in the darkness he couldn't tell his direction was tossing and rustling in his bed also. Eventually Parkins closed his eyes, determined to give sleep every chance. But here again, I'm very sorry to say, over-excitement asserted itself, and this time in another form, that of making pictures in the mind, because, as I know myself only too well, images do come to the closed eyes of one trying to sleep, images which are sometimes so little to his taste that he is forced to open those eyes to dispel them. Now, poor Professor Parkins, you see, his experience on this occasion was a singularly distressing one, because the picture that he saw was continuous. Of course, when he opened his eyes, yes, it went away. But when he closed them again, it framed itself afresh and acted itself out again, neither quicker nor slower than before. What he saw was this: a wide, dark expanse of beach, shingle edged by sand and intersected at short intervals by black wooden groins running down to the water, a scene, in fact, so like that of his afternoon's walk that in the absence of any landmark it could not be distinguished therefrom. The light was obscure, conveying the impression of gathering storm, late winter's evening and cold, slight rain. Now, on this bleak stage, at first, no actor was visible. But now, in the distance, a black, bobbing object appeared. Another moment, and it was a man running, jumping, clambering over the groins, and every few seconds looking eagerly behind him. Now, the nearer he got, the more obvious it became that he was not only anxious, but terribly, terribly frightened, although his face was not to be distinguished. He was, moreover, almost at the end of his strength, and each successive obstacle seemed to cause him more difficulty than the last. Because will he even get over this one, thought Parkins. It does seem rather taller than the rest. But yeah, he did. Half climbing, half throwing himself, he got over the groin and landed in a heap on the other side, where, as though really unable to move again, he lay crouching, looking up in an attitude of painful anxiety. Now, no cause of the runner's fear had so far been shown. But now, far up the shore, there was a little flicker of something light-coloured. Growing rapidly larger, it too declared itself to be a figure in pale, fluttering draperies, ill-defined. Now, there was something about its movements that made Parkins most unwilling to see it at close quarters. It would stop, raise its arms in the air, bow down to the ground, and then run, stooping along the shore to the water's edge and back again. Then, uprighting itself once more, it would continue its forward motion at a speed that was both startling and terrifying. The moment came, and it was hovering but a few yards behind that groin where the runner lay hiding. After a few ineffectual castings hither and thither, it came to a halt, raised its arms in the air, bowed down to the ground, and made a dash for the groin. Bah! Now, it was at that moment that Professor Parkins always failed in his resolution to keep his eyes closed. At long last, with very many great misgivings as to incipient failure of eyesight, overworked brain, excessive smoking and so forth, he determined to light his candle and spend the night reading rather than be tormented by this persistent panorama, which he saw could actually only really be a morbid reflection upon his walk and thoughts of that afternoon. Now, the scrape of match on box and the sudden glare of light must have disturbed some creatures of the night, rats or whatnot, which he heard scuttle across the floor from beside his bed. Yes. Well, a book was procured, and sleep did eventually visit the professor, but that after no short interval. For the first time in his ordered and prudent life, he forgot to blow out his bedside candle. And when he was called at 8 o'clock the next morning, there was still a little flicker in the socket. And oh dear me, a sad mess of gutted grease on top of the little table. No. It had not been a restful night. Well, after breakfast, he was in his room putting the finishing touches to his golfing costume. Fortune had once more allotted the Colonel to him as a partner, when one of the chambermaids came in. "Oh, I beg your pardon, sir. Will you be wanting any extra blankets on your bed, sir?" "Ah. Oh, yes, thank you very much. Yes, I think I might. It does rather seem as if it might turn colder. Which bed shall I put them on, sir?" "What? Well, the one that I slept in last night, of course. Where else?" "Oh, yes, but you seem to have tried them both, sir. Or leastways you had to make them both up this morning." "What? How absurd. I certainly never tried the other one. Well, I mean, apart from to put my cases on it when I unpacked the other day." "Oh, well, if you don't mind me saying, sir, all the blankets was bundled up quite as if nobody hadn't but spent but a very poor night in it, sir." "Really? Oh, well, I'm sorry. Rather embarrassing. I must have disrupted it more than I thought when I unpacked my things. Now, I expect a friend of mine to join me in a day or so, a gentleman from Cambridge. He will occupy the other bed for some time. That will be all right, I suppose, won't it?" "Oh, yes, sir, that's quite all right." "Will that be all, sir?" "Thank you, sir." And she departed to giggle with her colleagues. Well, the professor set forth, sternly determined to improve his game. And, well, you know, I'm glad to be able to report that he succeeded so far in that enterprise that as the morning wore on, the colonel became quite chatty. Yes, his great voice boomed out over the flats, as also certain of our own minor poets could have had it, like some great bourdon in a minster tower. Extraordinary wind we had last night, Professor. Yes, in my old home we said that someone had been whistling for it. Would you indeed, Colonel? Well, you still have that superstition on your part of the country, do you? Oh, no, don't know about a superstition. No, they believe it all over Denmark and Norway, not to mention the Yorkshire coast. And, well, you know, in my experience, there's generally something at the bottom of what these country folk hold to. But it's your drive. Oh, I'm sorry, whatever the correct word may be. Oh, God, sorry. Those of you who understand golf will have to supply your own stage directions during the following dialogue. After he'd taken his go, the professor continued. Yeah, now, apropos of what you were saying just now, Colonel, I think I ought to let you know that my own views on that subject are rather strong. Now, you see, I am a convinced disbeliever in anything that might be termed supernatural. What, sir? You mean to tell me you don't believe in ghosts, second sight, anything like that? No, in nothing at all like that, Colonel. No, in nothing at all like that. Well, sir, it seems to me, at any rate, that you must be little better than a Sadducee. Well, the professor was about to reply that in his opinion, the Sadducees are the most sensible people he'd read of in the Old Testament. But feeling some small doubt as to how much mention them was made in that work, he decided to laugh the accusation off. Yeah, well, all right, Colonel, perhaps I am. But you know, just as for whistling for the wind, just allow me to propound to you my theory on the subject. You see, the laws that govern winds are, as you know yourself, not at all perfectly known. I mean, to fisher folk and the like, not known at all, of course. Now, let us suppose that an eccentric man or woman, a stranger, perhaps, is seen repeatedly on the shore at some unusual hour and is heard to whistle. Very soon afterwards, a violent wind arises. Now, you see, a gentleman who had a barometer, or who could read the sky, could have foretold you that it would. The simple folk of a fishing village have no barometers, of course, and only a few rough rules for prophesying the weather. What, therefore, could be more natural than that the eccentric personage that I postulated should be credited with having raised the wind, or indeed that he or she should grasp at the reputation for having done so? Now, you take last night's wind, for instance. I was whistling, as a matter of fact. Oh, yeah, no, I blew upon a whistle twice, and the wind seemed to come in absolute answer to my call. Now, if any of the locals here had seen me, what? Whistling, were you, Professor? Yes. And what sort of whistle did you use? Oh, well, rather an interesting one, actually. I only found it yesterday. Here. Ah, no. No. I must have left it in my room. And thereupon Parkins narrated the manner of his discovery of the whistle, upon hearing which the colonel grunted and opined that in his place he would be cautious about using an object that had belonged to a set of papists, of whom, generally speaking, it might be affirmed that you never knew what they might not have been up to. Well, yes. I mean, both gentlemen continued to play well during the afternoon, or at least well enough to forget about everything else until the light began to fail them. It was only then that Parkins remembered that he had intended to carry out some more researches at the preceptory. But, well, it was no great matter, he decided. Yes, I might as well walk home with the colonel tonight. One day is as good as another when you're on holiday. Now, the two gentlemen were rounding a corner near the inn when the colonel was almost knocked off his feet by a boy who ran into him at the very top of his speed and then, instead of running away, remained clinging on to him, panting. Well, I mean, the first words of the warrior were naturally those of reproof and objurgation, but it very quickly became clear that this boy was almost speechless with fright. I mean, inquiries were useless, and when he finally got his breath back, he remained clinging onto the Colonel's legs and started to howl. I mean, he was at last detached, but he continued to howl. Good heavens, lad, what's the matter with you? What have you been up to? I've seen it wave at me out the window, sir, and I don't like it. What are you talking about? What window? The window at the hotel, sir. I've seen it wave at me. Well, at this point, Parkins was all for sending the silly little blight on his way. But no, the Colonel was determined to get to the bottom of the matter. Yeah, it was most dangerous, he said, to give a fright to a boy, such as this one had clearly had, and if it turned out that people had been playing tricks with him, they must be made to suffer for it in some way. Through a series of questions, he made out the following story. The boy had been playing on that patch of grass in front of the Globe Inn with some friends. Now, they'd been called away for their teas, and he himself was just about to leave when he happened to look up and see it a-waving at him. It appeared to be a figure of some kind, white, as far as he could tell. He couldn't see its face, but they were waving at me, sir, and it weren't the right thing. Well, was there a light on in the room? No, sir, I don't think there was no light. But which window was it? The front window at the hotel, sir, the big one that's got two little ones at the side. They were waving at me. All right, lad, calm down. Good heavens! I expect it was just some bully trying to get a reaction out of you. And next time, like a good, brave little English boy, you just throw a stone at it. Yeah, well, no, obviously not if you find a window. But you go and tell the landlord of the inn and say that Colonel Wilson sent you. And look, here's sixpence. Oh, no, I see that it's a shilling. Now, be on your way. Well, he hurried off with much agitated thanks, and the two gentlemen went round to the front of the inn. Now, there was only one window that matched the description they'd been hearing. Huh. Well, that's peculiar, said Parkins. It was evidently my window that the lad was talking about. Will you come up for a moment, Colonel? What? Well, we ought to be able to see if anyone's been taking liberties in my room. Oh, yes, of course. Now, at his door, Parkins made to open it, but then he stopped and felt in his pocket. Right. Well, now, this is rather more serious than I first thought. I remember that before I started this morning, I locked my door. It is locked now, and moreover, here is the key. Oh, yeah, well, I'm sorry, but if the hotel staff are in the habit of going into one's room when one is out, then all I can say is, all I can say is that I heartily disapprove of the practice. Conscious of having made a somewhat weak climax, Parkins busied himself with opening the door and lighting the candles. Yes, well, no, nothing seems to be disturbed. Well, apart from your bed, Professor. Well, no, that isn't my bed. I use the other one. But hey, no. You're right. It does rather look as if someone's been playing tricks with it. Oh, and good heavens, indeed it did. The sheets were twisted up in the most tortuous confusion. Oh, gosh, I know what must have happened, said Parkins eventually. Apparently I disrupted the linen more than I should have done when I unpacked my things. That the maid clearly hasn't made it up yet. Perhaps she came in to make it up. That boy saw her through the window, and she was called away, and she locked the door. That must have been what happened. But no. When the maid was called, she deposed that she had made up the bed that very morning when the gentleman was in the room and had not been in there since. Well, I mean, this was a real puzzle. I mean, nothing of value had been taken from the room. And, of course, Parkins could remember the disposition of small objects on the table well enough to be sure that no pranks had been played with them. You know, he was beginning to think that boy had been imposing on the Colonel. Now, the latter was unwontedly quiet and pensive during dinner and for the rest of the evening. And when Parkins made to go to bed towards midnight, he sidled up to him and muttered in a gruff undertone, "You know where I am if you need me in the night, Professor." "What? Oh, aye, yes, no, of course, Colonel, thank you. I know where you are. Good night." He turned round, and soon each man was in his own room. Now, by some unfortunate accident, there were neither blinds nor curtains to the window of the Professor's room. He'd thought little of this the night before, but tonight there seemed every prospect of a bright moon rising to shine directly on his bed and no doubt wake him later on. Well, when he realised this, he was a good deal annoyed. But he succeeded in rigging up, with an ingenuity that I can only envy, with the help of a stick, an umbrella, a railway blanket and a few safety pins, a passable screen, which, if it only held together, would completely keep the moonlight from his bed. And he was soon comfortably in that bed. Yeah, well, when he'd read enough of a somewhat solid work to induce a decided wish for sleep, he cast a drowsy look about the room, blew out his candles, and sank back upon the pillow. I mean, he must have slept for an hour, or even more, when a sudden clatter woke him up in a most unwelcome fashion. In a moment, he realised what had happened. His carefully constructed screen had collapsed, and right now, a bright, frosty moon was shining directly in his eyes. Well, this was highly vexing. Oh, good grief. Could he manage to sleep without it, or should he get up and reconstruct the screen? He lay back, of course, a moment and pondered the possibilities. And then, turning sharply over, and with all his eyes open, he lay breathlessly listening. There'd been a movement. He was sure. In the bed on the other side of the room. Yeah, well, tomorrow he'd get it moved. There must be rats or some such playing about in it. It was quiet again now. No. The commotion began again. A rattling and a rustling. Surely more than any single rat could produce. Now, you see, I can figure for myself something of the Professor's bewilderment and horror, because I have in a dream some 43 years ago seen the same thing happen. But you yourselves will hardly perhaps imagine how terrible it was for him to see a figure sit up in what he had known was an empty bed. Now, he was out of his own bed in one bound and made straight for the window where lay his only weapon, the umbrella with which he'd propped up his screen. Now, as it turned out, this was the very worst thing that he could have done, because the personage in the bed rose with a sudden swift motion and took up a position between the two beds, directly in front of the door, with its arms outstretched. Parkins gazed at it in a horrid perplexity. I mean, for some reason, the idea of getting past it and escaping through the door was intolerable to him. You know, he could not have borne, and he knew not why, but he could not have borne to touch it. And as for its touching him, he would rather have cast himself through the window than have that happen. It was hovering in a band of dark shadow, and he'd not yet seen what its face was like, but now it began to move. And the Professor realised with some horror and some relief that it must be blind, because it seemed to feel about with its muffled arms in a groping and random fashion. Suddenly it became aware of the bed that he'd just vacated. It came to a halt, raised its arms in the air, dashed towards it, and began to feel the pillows in a way that made Parkins shudder, as he'd never in his life thought possible. And then it entered that patch of light in front of the window, and the Professor saw for the first time what manner of thing it was. Now, as I'm sure you can appreciate, he deeply dislikes being questioned on this subject, but he did once describe something of it in my hearing, and I gather that what he chiefly remembers is a horrible, an intensely horrible face of crumpled linen. What expression he read upon it he could not or would not say, but that the fear of it went nigh to maddening him was certain. But he was not at leisure to watch it for long. With formidable swiftness it leapt into the centre of the room, and a piece of its drapery brushed against Parkins' face. Now he could not keep back, although he knew how perilous a sound was. He could not suppress a cry of disgust, and this gave the searcher an instant clue. It leapt upon him upon the instant, and the next moment he was halfway out of the window, uttering cry upon cry at the very top of his breath, and the linen face was pressed against his own. At this, almost the last possible moment, deliverance came, as you will have guessed. The Colonel burst into the room, in time to see the horrid group at the window. By the time he got there, but one figure was left standing. Parkins fell into his arms in a faint, and at his feet lay a tumble heap of bed linen. Well, I mean, the old soldier asked no questions, but busied himself with keeping everybody else out of the room and getting the professor back into his bed. And he himself, wrapped in the railway blanket, occupied the other bed for the rest of that night. Rogers arrived at 9 o'clock the next morning, far more welcome than he would have been the day before. And the three men held a lengthy consultation in the professor's rooms, at the end of which the Colonel went out of the front door of the Globe Inn, holding a small object between his thumb and forefinger, which he cast into the sea, as far as a very brawny arm could send it. And later that afternoon, the smoke of a burning was seen to rise from the back premises of the Globe Inn. Now, oh gosh, what story was patched up for the staff and visitors of the hotel? I simply don't recollect. I mean, the professor was somehow cleared of the ready charge of delirium tremens and the Globe with the reputation of a troubled house. Now, what would have happened to Professor Parkins had not the Colonel intervened when he did? Well, I mean, it's absolutely certain he would either have fallen out of the window or he would have lost his mind. But you see, what more the being that came in answer to the whistle could have done than frighten? You see, it's simply not so clear. There seemed to be absolutely nothing material about it save the linen, out of which it had made itself a body. That the Colonel, who remembered a not dissimilar occurrence in India some years earlier, was of the opinion that had Parkins only closed with it, it could have done very little, and that its one power was that of frightening. The whole thing, he said, went to confirm his opinion of the Church of Rome. Aye. Well, there's not really much more to say. Although, as I'm sure you can appreciate, Professor Parkins' views on certain subjects are less clear-cut than they used to be. His nerves have suffered too. He cannot even now see a surplice hanging on the back of a door quite unmoved. And the sight of a scarecrow in a field late on a winter's afternoon has cost him more than one sleepless night. Didn't even understand that little joke.